Mr. Austin Iwa joins us. He's a former AIG for the police. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on the program today. Well, you heard that report. Yeah, the National Security Council meeting. Rising from that meeting, the AGF did brief the press, and those were some of their considerations at the moment. So, the ban on motorcycles, popularly called Okada, he's given several reasons, and then the mining bit, plus the Kuje matter. We'll come to that. But what was your impression when this news got to you?
Good morning. Thank you for having me on your this wonderful show. What came to my mind when I heard about this was another way of telling us the lack of capacity of government to regulate the transportation, the public transportation system in the country. We've had, because of the collapse of a public transportation system in this country, Nigerians took into their hands by developing new ways of moving around and going to their workplaces. And the easiest form was the use of motorcycles, popularly known as Okada. It's not traditional. I think maybe it's only in Nigeria and maybe some other African countries that you have this mode of transportation system. But I think that to a large extent, we have seen over the years the use of this mode of transportation for the commission of crimes. It started with low-level crimes of Okada people or motorcycle people running through the roads and snatching people's handbags and all that. We started seeing that, and now it has become a major means of huge transportation for bandits and other criminals within our society. But then there are economic implications. As we discuss further, you will see that there will be implications of this ban. The motorcycle business has a value chain that extends to several pockets of economic workers. You can see the people walking around the Okada parks, the mama put, the people selling akara, the people selling all this. We lose out. There will be mass unemployment problem that will accompany this. And then again, we should be careful so that we don't, in the process of trying to deal with one form of crime, we now create new forms of crime, because hundreds of millions of Nigerian youths are involved in this business, in this Okada business, and throwing them out of the market now will bring a huge problem. I haven't heard government talk about any method of compensation for these people.
Okay, before we get to that bit, well, let's not forget, this was a National Security Council meeting, and several governors in this country, different parts of the region, have banned Okada. And tricycles still operate. And they say that it was predicated on several security reports. So one wonders that all of those security reports, perhaps this National Council meeting might have been privy to all of that, saying, look, having looked at this, this is what we're considering doing. So if you look at those states, perhaps they have banned it, and they're used the reasons they've given. And don't forget, the tricycles are there. So wouldn't that suffice, saying no for this type of transportation, because the bandits, the terrorists, criminals use them a lot. So use the tricycles, it's safer, perhaps slower for agencies to catch up with. So wouldn't that plug the gap or the concern that you have about getting these people out of business completely?
Yes, absolutely correct. I was trying to say that we haven't seen any government making proposal for a safety net. Why don't the government say, okay, we are buying back these motorcycles from you, as a way of helping you to get the tricycles, a kind of a safety net for these people who will be thrown out of the market, millions of them. And so government needs to, I'm not sure that the government analyze the implications. They are more focused on the impact of motorcycles on crime in certain parts of the country, not even in all parts of the country, or even say, okay, we limit you to certain capacity. I know that in Lagos State, when the ban took place, I think that was 2020, they limited motorcycles with 200 cc to specific areas of the state. We need to know what is in place for these people that will suddenly be thrown out of the market. What is the safety net here? Are you going to buy back this motorcycle and cushion the effect, the economic effect on these people by maybe reducing the cost of transportation of tricycles and developing a system in which people purchase tricycle without very little hardship on their side, or without going about looking for money to buy the tricycles that we will soon see will be more expensive now that we have this ban coming up.
Well, it's important to note that, I mean, government said clearly that it's still a consideration. Okay, it's still something that it's mulling. It's not been decided on yet. And, you know, you talked about the economic consequences. You know, this for a government essentially is first security. And the AGF said yesterday that the government is not unaware of the economic consequences of the proposed resolutions, particularly this motorcycle ban. But it has become imperative in order to guarantee the nation's security. You started by saying this is essentially government saying it is unable, or it has failed in its job, as it were, to essentially regulate the transport system. So are you saying that there's a way that we can still have the motorcycles operate, in spite of the fact that we've seen that they have been used largely for terrorist attacks across board? Are you saying there's still a way to have motorcycles operate, a way to regulate them by government rather than go the full hog banning them?
Well, one of the ways government can regulate them by making sure that the operators are identified, they are registered with a government agency, and they are regulated and monitored. And another way of regulating them is ensuring that they are given support to make sure that they are able to purchase these vehicles without any stress on their pockets. And so if government brings in regulatory procedures that makes it possible for them to be able to identify those people operating. You can see even the picture you have on your on the screen now. These vehicles are not even registered. They don't have vehicle registration numbers. So it's very difficult for government to know who is in it. And then government can support the organization of the transportation system, the Okada Association and whatever they call themselves, making sure that they get proper identification. In some areas, in some parts of the country, local authorities and local transport authorities have been able to give them, some kind of shirts that they wear and identify numbers and all that. So what we need right now, it's regulating the industry, that area of public transportation, and ensuring that a specific capacity, motorcycle capacity, is given to them, and specific areas they can operate. Not all areas like we have seen in the Northwest and other parts where they have the problems.
These images we're seeing are images from, city centers, places that are well populated. I mean, you can see vehicles, you see that there's a lot of activities going on. But in areas we've seen terrorist attacks, and I'm glad you've worked in some of these, northern states. You understand the topography of these states. They're not city centers. They are essentially, they call them forests. They are sometimes ungoverned spaces. So it's not a place where they have maybe an agent or, what do they call them, task force that will stop them and say, where's your, identification, where's the ticket, or where's your registration, and all of that. And a lot of these people don't essentially buy it for commercial purposes. They just pick them up from somewhere. In fact, sometimes bring them from outside of the country, bring them inside and use them to operate. So how well would you be able to regulate them in those areas, which is where we have majority of the terrorist attacks?
And those are the areas that we need to do a total ban. I'm not against ban on motorcycles or Okada. I'm not against it. But what concerns me is the economic implication, given the fact that we are in the throes of a serious economic strangulation on virtually every Nigerian. So my concern is you try to stop one type of crime and then you create another type of crime again that will also have negative impact on our communities. Yes, I was when I was CP Kaduna State, I had serious problems with this Okada people, especially those that operate on the fringes of areas where we have this banditry. And that brings in the issue of importation of these vehicles and where they are taken to. If the department that is in charge of trade looks into where these areas, where these motorcycles are taken to, I support that in areas where we have banditry, there should be total ban on these motorcycles, complete ban on these motorcycles. Because what these guys do is that they buy a motorcycle and then redesign it, especially the tires. They don't have air pumped tires. They have tires that are stuffed with rubber and so that they'll be able to traverse very difficult areas. I think the ban should stand. But since government is saying that it's still a consideration, perhaps they are looking at how to handle the implications.
Mr. Iwo, like Kayode, I'm glad that you are a former Assistant Inspector General of Police, so you will understand the psychology of the criminal-minded to a very large extent, which is why my concern borders more on the strategic nature or otherwise of the thinking of government in considering a proposal on a ban of Okada operation, and the wisdom in announcing it in the first place, because we're dealing with, sophisticated criminals who may also be anticipating government's move and reconsidering their approach to continuing with some of these crimes. So isn't this treating the symptoms rather than the root of banditry and insurgency and kidnapping and all of the other crimes associated with it?
Of course, this is what I've always said. I've always said that we seem to be more reactive than proactive in dealing with these issues. What we deal with are the symptoms, generally, whether it's banditry, whether it's kidnapping and all that. I have always advocated that government should give us policies and strategies that look at the underlying factors that create these various crimes. I mean, this is a country where there is no national policy on community safety, for example, or even public safety. The national security strategy of Nigeria is military-oriented. It's not law enforcement-oriented. And so it's very difficult. Government should focus on the underlying factors. And most of the underlying factors are economic, lack of jobs. People don't have jobs. People don't have skills.
Pardon me, Mr. Johnson. Yes. So when you say military-oriented, not enforcement-oriented, does that mean that if they were to carry on with this, it is not enforceable?
Come again, I don't get it.
Is it enforceable if they go on with it?
Absolutely, it's enforceable. Absolutely, it's enforceable. But then again, we have to look at the fact that these people do not operate in organized communities. They operate in the outskirts, on the fringes of communities. They are in the bush. They only come in with motorcycles and go back. The best that can be done.
Mr. Iwo, are you quite sure about the point of this being enforceable? Because the most recent ban in Lagos, the reactions to it was a pushback in a certain part of Lagos, and that spoke to the lack of capacity to enforce it. Now imagine this on a scale, on a national scale. Does the police force have the capacity to enforce it on a national scale?
This is not a project for the police alone. It's a project for all law enforcement agencies. It is enforceable, but it can be done in phases, and it's not a short-term thing. It has to be a long-term thing. In the cities and villages where we have this Okada, of course it's enforceable. It's just going around the city and picking all these motorcycles and dumping them in a place. But with regards to the bandits, it's going to be very, very difficult and tough, and it's going to take a long time before we're able to retrieve the motorcycle. But then again, we can cut off the supply chain. How do these motorcycles get to these bandits? Law enforcement should be able to look at it and see how they can cut off the supply chain, so that the more recoveries the law enforcement does, the less availability of these motorcycles to these bandits.
Talking about supply chains, one would think that we will first of all start with perhaps where the motorcycles are manufactured. If we have an assembly plant here in Nigeria, there will be questions as to whether we want to make what is assembled here for export alone. If we're importing, maybe there will be questions as to whether to stop importation or put a ban on importation of motorcycles, etc. We haven't quite heard much in that regard. Are you curious as well?
Absolutely, I'm curious. I mean, we do not manufacture these vehicles in Nigeria. What they do is to import and assemble. CK, they bring down the completely knocked down parts and assemble them and sell them. And I mean, government can make the importation very expensive. That is an option, to the extent that it will be difficult, to the extent that it reduces the number of CK completely knocked down parts that come into this country. And then secondly, government knows, I mean, through the customs, government knows the major importers of these vehicles. They know them. They can engage with them and get to know who are the people that come to purchase high number of these vehicles. Who are the people that purchase vehicles and all that? A lot of intelligence is needed here, not just reacting by arresting people on the streets with motorcycles, maybe innocent people that don't have anything to do with crime.
I'm just wondering, so I want to take you back to, how we plan our trajectory. Because whenever Okadas were not here many years ago, I'm trying to, maybe flash back to when we started seeing Okadas, and then it became a popular means of transport. For a very long time, they were the means of transport in many rural areas. When they started infiltrating the urban areas and then becoming more and more affordable for, many people to buy it, and did we have any thinking whatsoever in terms of projections as to what the effect of this could be if, it got out of hand? Do we have any, this is now for Okada, but do we have anybody, any institution of government whose job it is to look at a trend that is emerging and see how that is going to affect the country on the whole, perhaps with, with the insight to either stop it, encourage it, or warn about, caution on it, so to speak?
Okada business was encouraged by politicians, if you remember very well, when they started doing what they call poverty alleviation programs. And they started bringing in motorcycle and distributing to young people to do transportation business. At that time, nobody thought of the implications. At that time, even if people, for some of us then, we looked at the implication, not in the context of crime, but in the context of disposal of these motorcycles by the time they become old. How do we handle them? How do we recycle them into something else? That was what we were looking at. And also we're looking at the value chain of creating thousands of motorcycle mechanics. We didn't look at the implication, the criminal implication. Now, it has been seen as a very easy way of movement for criminals. And if you recall very well, it started also, the criminal aspect started also when they started snatching handbags and from people, they ride past you and snatch your bag and drive away fastly. And also even attacking people who are sitting outside and enjoying themselves. They come in motorcycles, attack the people, collect their valuables and move away very fast. We didn't look at this implication. And I'm not sure that that we have any government agency that does any study.
And isn't that a problem?
Yeah, indeed it is. Indeed, it is a problem. What I have noticed in this country is that we hardly study things. We react. We hardly commission studies of implications and advantages of a policy, a policy, for government or either local level or state level. We just come out and say certain things based on what we believe are the problems. It's a big problem. It's a big problem. I think that the law enforcement agencies should the pronouncement by government. It's a wake-up call for them to begin to do some studies and gather more intelligence on this area.
All right, so Mr. We've seen the kind of daring attacks that has been carried out on mining sites, and then how people are kidnapped, and then they come out and tell us they pay hundreds of millions in ransom. And now this council meeting also considering banning mining and ransom payment. So one would have thought if the security agencies could nip in the bud, they could have prevented that all the while. But now that they're putting it in that realm of we're considering banning it as a means of cutting off funding for terrorists, how is that going to be handled by security agencies, assuming they go on with this ban as well?
It's going to be very difficult because mining, I mean, all over the country, people are mining all kinds of things that we don't even know about. And I think that some of the licenses are gotten through the back door or either in connivance with the agencies that control this mining areas or with other organized criminal gangs. There has been a development of massive organized criminal gang operation in mining sites. And I don't know how the security agencies will manage this because it's a very dangerous area considering the value of minerals that are stolen from this country and exported out. But I think that with a policy and a strategy, it will give the law enforcement agencies will have more focus in dealing with this situation. I think it's a big one. I think the civil defense is one of the lead agencies in protecting minerals. And other economic, petroleum and all that.
Right. So first, you've identified a failure in properly regulating transport, especially motorcycles. Now, assume you've identified another failure in regulating mining activities. And, looking through this statement, at least part of the things that were said that, they're still trying to establish correlation between mining motorcycles, which they suspect provide funding for the supply of arms to the terrorists. Two things come up for me. First, how long should it take to establish the correlation? This is something we've been grappling with perhaps for as long as, even beyond this administration. So how long will it take to get that correlation between, mining activities and terrorism, funding for getting arms and ammunition and all of that? Should it really take that long?
Well, if we have an organized, if security agencies are organized properly in that area, it shouldn't take long. I mean, bandits and terrorists use any other means available to them to get funding for their arms and transportation, their feeding and their general welfare. They use all means available to them. First of all, who buys these minerals? Who are the people that are buying these minerals from them? We need to look at the value chain, from the criminal value chain that is involved, from the mining sites to the disposal. Who are the people that buy these things? Government officials. There are government officials that are involved in this value chain, in this chain of this criminal chain. Government, the law enforcement agencies can work in partnership with government to nip this.
Mr. Iwa, so does that lend credence to the talks about complicity of even security agencies in these terrorist activities when it concerns mining and all of that?
Of course, you cannot rule that out. We have seen situations, areas where security agencies have been involved in giving information to terrorists or bandits, and also getting themselves involved in terrorism and bandits. So you cannot rule out the connivance of certain individual security agencies.
Speaking of proactive and reactive approaches, where we left off initially, the National Assembly is considering a forest guards bill. Where does this stand in terms of reactive and proactive approaches? Is it reactive or proactive? And how will this work in partnership with security agencies in response to the age-long call for them to go into the forest areas, which is their base, to dislodge the bandits?
We've always had forest guards, but over the years, they have been neglected. I recall that when I was in Gombe State as the Commissioner of Police, we were looking at that area with the government, and the government was able to, in the context of the header farmer crisis, the government was able to employ livestock field officers to protect farmers as well as protect the headers. And at that time, I had discussion with someone from the Federal Ministry of Agri who told me that he was the last of the trained forest guards. So if the National Assembly is looking at that area, that is interesting. It's a law enforcement outfit. The forest guards are law enforcement outfits, and we need them in the forest, both as proactive and as well as reactive. Proactivity, you have to look at the root cause. What is causing this? And like I said earlier, most of the root causes are economic, are social. Lack of jobs, lack of skills to do anything, idle young men that have a lot of energy to expend, and unfortunately find themselves as in the fold of criminal gangs.
But at the moment, do you see any challenge with states? Because, the states will always say, well, when it comes to taking some of these decisions which border on the economy, as much as there's a security implication, we need to have a huge say as well.
I suppose we say we are running a federation. If we are running a federation, states should be given more power to take control of most of these things. In the regulation of motorcycles and most of the areas that create problems for them, I think states should be given that power. There should be amendment. Those are some of the things that the National Assembly should be looking at amendments that empower local authorities and state governments to manage issues that has to do with their areas. I think that's an area. If we are running a federation, we should begin to look at that, and also fund. The federal government should provide more budgetary allocation to enable local authorities fund these areas. Crime, as we generally say, is a local thing, and the solutions are in the local areas, not in the urban areas.
Well, part of why they keep talking about local policing, but we have to thank you for coming on this morning, Mr. Osenewa, former AIG of Police.
Thank you for having me.